For my thoughts on all the latest happenings in the NFL in a completely relaxed, unscripted format, be sure to check out my channel, JG9 News. And now, on with our feature presentation. This man right here is Neal Colzie, and you can make the legitimate argument that in 1982, he was the best safety in professional football. Colzie had been a solid player for a long period of time. The former first-round pick in 1975 finished second in the voting for AP Defensive Rookie of the Year in his first season with the Oakland Raiders, only behind future Hall of Fame linebacker Robert Brazile of the Houston Oilers. And he was on the Raiders in 1976 when they won Super Bowl XI over the Minnesota Vikings, in a game that you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner. However, by this point in his career in 1982, Colzie, now on his third team after stints with the Raiders and the Dolphins, was almost unstoppable. There were 9 players in 1982 who received at least one vote for AP Defensive Player of the Year, an award eventually won by Lawrence Taylor of the New York Giants. Of those 9 players, 7 of them played in the front 7, so defensive line and linebacker. Only 2 of them were defensive backs. One of them was Dallas Cowboys cornerback Everson Walls. The other player? You guessed it, Neal Colzie, who was an AP second-team All-Pro, and who might have been single-handedly responsible for getting the Buccaneers to the playoffs for the second straight season and for just the 3rd time in franchise history. He was named the MVP of the Buccaneers after leading the team with 3 interceptions, and was an anchor on a very good pass defense that finished the season 4th in the league in passing yards allowed, as well as an overall defense that was 3rd in the NFL in that category. Without Colzie, the Buccaneers do not have the success that they do. Bringing on Colzie after he got cut by the Miami Dolphins was a great decision. And speaking of great decisions, you can make a great decision right now by hitting that like button down below, subscribing, and turning on that notification bell so you don't miss a single video that we post on the channel. We post every single day about the weird and wacky history of the NFL. So if you like that sort of stuff, then this is the place to be. So hit like and subscribe down below and help us reach 60,000 subscribers. Thanks in advance for your support. However, as great as this man was during the 1982 season on the field, off the field, well, that was another issue entirely. Because once the Buccaneers got into the playoffs and had to face the Dallas Cowboys in their first-round matchup, Colzie was, shall we say, not the greatest sport in the world. He had some insane, bizarre, and asinine comments that we need to break down, because more than 40 years later, it makes no sense as to why on earth he thought this would be a good idea to say. I can't even say that this is trash talk, because at least we have seen people back trash talk up. This is just being a poor sport and being downright delusional about everything, with the most backwards logic imaginable. And this is the story behind Neal Colzie and the 1982 Tampa Bay Buccaneers, as in, the player and the team that had no idea whatsoever how to handle losing. Before I talk about the actual incident in question, we need some context for how the game itself was going, as well as not just the importance of this game, but the historical significance of it. It's January 9th, 1983, and we find ourselves down at Texas Stadium for a first-round playoff game between the Dallas Cowboys and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, with both teams making the playoffs in the abbreviated 9-game season that was so short and so bizarre that the playoffs aren't even technically known as the playoffs. As for the 1982 season, they're known as the Super Bowl Tournament. Obviously, this game is a big one, and I think that goes without saying. The winner of this game advances to the second round, where they will be one of 8 teams left standing to receive the Vince Lombardi Trophy, and where they will be just 2 wins away from making it to the Super Bowl, while the loser will have their season end and will be one and done. However, for the Buccaneers in particular, this game was especially big, because after starting 0-3 and then 2-4, needing to win out to make the playoffs, and doing it in dramatic fashion by the skin of their teeth, the Bucs had a chance at revenge. The previous year in 1981, the Buccaneers won the NFC Central, and were rewarded with a divisional round matchup against the Dallas Cowboys at this same venue at Texas Stadium. That game did not go according to plan, as the Cowboys won 38-0, in what might be one of the biggest playoff massacres of all time, and at the very least, one of the most uncompetitive playoff games in the post-merger era. But now, this was a new season. This was a brand new campaign, and everything reset. This was a chance to come back to the same spot 1 year later and right a wrong and beat the Cowboys. Obviously, it was not going to be easy. The Cowboys entered this game as 8-point favorites, which was 2 possessions back in 1982. And whereas the Cowboys were widely considered to be one of the top 3 teams in the NFL, the Buccaneers squeaked into the playoffs with a negative point differential and with just 1 win against a team that finished the season above 500. But this is the playoffs, and anything can happen. Time for a good old-fashioned revenge game. Or not. Because as you could probably tell from all these highlights, or should I say, lowlights if you're a fan of the Buccaneers, this game did not go according to plan at all. Oddly enough, I've talked about this game in a previous video of mine from a completely different angle, and how a dentist helped Danny White and helped save the Cowboys season, which you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner. Sometimes we do that on this channel where things intersect with each other and we can talk about the same game multiple times, just from different angles. And that's what we're doing here. Either way, even though this game was closer than the last one, and was not the 38-0 massacre that the 1981 divisional round game was, this game still did not produce the intended result for the Buccaneers, as when all was said and done, the Cowboys prevailed on their home field by a final score of 30-17. Even though Tampa led 17-16 after the third quarter, the Cowboys scored the final 14 points of the game, completely dominating in the fourth quarter when it mattered most. Tampa's defense had been a bright spot for them all season, but it faltered on this day in many ways, as Danny White completed 60% of his passes and threw for 312 yards, while future Hall of Fame running back Tony Dorsett had 110 yards on well over 4 yards per carry, just churning his way through Tampa's defensive line. Granted, Tampa's offense did the defense no favors, with the Buccaneers only netting 8 first downs, and with starting quarterback Doug Williams having an abysmal showing, going 8 for 28, completing 28% of his passes with 113 yards, 3 interceptions, and a passer rating of 16.2, which is worse than if he did nothing but spike the ball into the ground on every single play. I mean, he literally started the game 0 for 7, which is always a good sign for how your offense is going to play. But the defense, which granted was on the field a lot because of how inept Tampa was on offense, didn't do a whole lot, as they allowed 456 yards of total offense, which was Tampa's worst defensive showing of the season. For some perspective on just how much the Cowboys dominated on offense and had their way with Tampa beside these highlights, here's a chart of every single game that the Buccaneers played in chronological order during the 1982 season. In the regular season, the most yards they allowed was 380 in a 13-10 win against the New Orleans Saints. They actually had more games with under 300 yards allowed than over 300 yards allowed, which is really good, as again, there's a reason why the Bucs had the 3rd best defense in the league in the regular season in that yardage category. But in the playoff game, those 456 yards against Dallas tower over everything else. And while it wasn't the main reason why the Buccaneers lost, seeing as Doug Williams played more like Doug the cartoon character, it definitely was a reason. And with that, Tampa's season was over. Thanks to a poor showing on offense and a poor showing on defense, for the 2nd straight season, the Buccaneers fell at the hands of the Dallas Cowboys, eliminated from the postseason by what felt like a rival that they hated, but that the Cowboys felt no animosity toward whatsoever. The Bucs hated the Cowboys, and the Cowboys didn't even know that the Bucs existed, seeing as by this point in time, the Cowboys had beaten the Bucs all 5 times the teams met, and outscored the Bucs 133-50 across that stretch, never allowing more than 17 points and holding the Bucs to single digits more often than not. And after the loss, the star man all season on the defensive side of the ball, Neal Colzie, decided to speak to the press. In a normal world, you'd expect to hear something like, "I'm disappointed the season had to come to an end like this," or something like, "We didn't play well enough to win," or even something like, we couldn't capitalize on the plays we needed to. And if that's what happened, then this is like every other press conference. This is a complete non-story, and I'm not making this video more than 4 decades later. However, as you might have been able to guess, that is not what happened. Not in the slightest bit. Because Colzie decided to spend his press conference talking about how much the Cowboys stunk. Because that makes complete sense. Let's talk about how much a team stinks when they beat you by 2 possessions, when they whooped you in the playoffs last year, and when earlier in the regular season, they beat you guys. And it'd be one thing if Colzie said something like, the Cowboys didn't play that well. We should have beaten them, and we could have beaten them, but we made too many mistakes and played sloppily. I can live with that answer 100%, and linebacker Hugh Green even said something along those lines. Instead, Colzie went off the deep end and said, if that's the best we got in our conference, then we should represent the conference in the playoffs. I don't think they'll go far at all in the playoffs. Seriously, Neal Colzie was out there suggesting that the Cowboys were not that good, and that if that was the best the Cowboys could do, then the Buccaneers should be the ones advancing. The NFL should wipe the result away. Call it a do-over, the game doesn't count, because the Bucs are the better team. I'm sorry, what? There are many, and I truly mean it, many things wrong with Neal Colzie's backwards logic pertaining to this game right here that he just played. Number one, I don't know how far the Cowboys are going to go in the playoffs. As we later find out, they make it pretty darn far, making it to the NFC Championship before falling to Washington, as in the eventual Super Bowl champion, but that's beside the point. The point is that even though I don't know how far the Cowboys are going to go in the playoffs, I can safely say that they've gone farther than you. I can safely say that the Cowboys went further than the Bucs. Saying that the Cowboys won't go far in the playoffs is kind of irrelevant when they went far enough to beat you guys, and you won't be going any further. It's like if someone I know has better grades than me and gets into Harvard and I don't, and I say, I don't think they're going to make it at Harvard. It's too hard for them. Irrelevant. They got in, I didn't. Boo-hoo. But number two, this is the true meaning of we judge ourselves by our intentions and others by their actions. When we forget to put our turn signal on, it's because we thought we flicked it up, but we didn't and our fingers slipped. But when other people forget to turn theirs on, they're the worst drivers ever and deserve the death penalty. Colzie said that the Cowboys shouldn't be representing the conference in the playoffs because they played like crap, and that was the best they had. But who's to say that this was their best outing? They didn't say that. Not once did they ever imply that this was their best game of the season. Maybe they also felt as though they played like crap. Maybe this wasn't their A game or even their B game. So for you to say that the Cowboys don't deserve to advance over the Bucs because the Cowboys look bad while playing good football, while you just look bad and if you played better, you would have won, is insane. There are so many hypotheticals and so many flaws with your logic that it's ridiculous and disrespectful to the team that just handily beat you. And number three, let me get this straight. If that's the best in the conference, then the team that should represent the conference should be the team that lost to them? How does that make any sense? The Cowboys won this game by 2 possessions. They won in the regular season back in November. I know last year was last year, but in the playoffs in 1981, just 12 months ago, with pretty similar rosters, they won. The Cowboys defeated the Buccaneers 3 times in the last 400 days, with the Buccaneers winning a grand total of 0 of those games. And somehow, this means that the Bucs should represent the conference? Imagine if it's trivia night and I'm on a team, and the category this round is European history. And I don't know a ton of the answers, but one of my teammates knows everything. Our team is tied with another team. So at the end of the round, the trivia host asks each team to send one person up for a bonus question. And I say that I should go up there instead of the guy that's gotten everything right. Because if that's the best we have to offer, we're going to lose. Like, no, that's not how this works. Every time you play the Cowboys, you lost. We had enough of a sample size to prove that the Cowboys are better than you. How does it make any sense, in the best interest of the conference, whatever the heck that even means, to send the worst team over the better team? Neal Colzie, to sum it all up, thinks that the Buccaneers lost this game right here, even though the Cowboys were not a good team. And because of that, the Buccaneers should advance in the best interest of the conference, because the Cowboys won't make it far because they played their A game and the Buccaneers did not. Even though the Cowboys never said anything of the like. Yeah, this was asinine. No other way to say it, just asinine. And the good news for the man who made those asinine comments after the game between these two teams behind me right here is that Neal Colzie would never have to worry about the Dallas Cowboys in the playoffs ever again. Neal Colzie would never have to face the Cowboys on his path to the Super Bowl. The bad news is that's because Colzie lasted just one more season in the NFL. He spent much of the 1983 season hurt, and then he was waived before the start of training camp in 1984, and he was not picked up by another team, so he never played again after 1983. From getting literal Defensive Player of the Year votes and being named the MVP of the Buccaneers to being out of the NFL in a span of 18 months. Hopefully he took it better than how he took this loss. So what's the moral of the story here? If you lose a game and you're trying to think of things that you should say to the press afterwards, think of what Neal Colzie did after this game right here, and then do the exact opposite. Do everything differently. It's not a good idea to talk trash about a team that just beat you and say how bad they stink and try and twist their gameplay into something that it was not. It's not a good idea to say that you, as in the losers of the game, should move on and represent the conference because the winners weren't good, even though the winners were good enough to beat you, and by multiple possessions, I might add. And it's not a good idea to say that a team was so bad that they will not advance far in the playoffs when they were good enough to beat you and when they went further than you did. Just best to stick to the approved script. It's boring and mundane, I get it, but it saves you from embarrassment. Trust me, it saves you a ton. Because on this day in January of 1983, Neal Colzie was more like Neal Crazy. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL Trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.